안녕하세요. 잠들입니다. 네, 하루의 마지막, 하루의 마무리를 함께 해주신 여러분들 감사합니다. 토토리님 안녕하세요. 잠잘 준비 마치고 미리 들어왔어요. 글 남겨주셨어요. 네, 훌륭합니다. 잘하셨어요. EHG님 와 데미안, 네, 오늘 읽어드리려고 합니다. 진주님 안녕하세요. 지금 시애틀은 아침 7시예요. 늘 감사해요. 네, 아침부터 같이 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다. 저는 지금 오전 8시예요. 시애틀은 어떻게 날씨가 많이 춥지 않나요? 제가 사는 캐나다는 저번 주 토요일부터 많이 추워졌거든요. 근데 시애틀은 아마 눈까지는 안 오지 않았을까 궁금합니다. 네, 아모스님 안녕하세요. 네, 저도 안녕하세요. 네, 다시 한번 감사의 말씀을 드리면서 오늘은 시작하기 전에 댓글들을 몇 개 좀 여러분들과 나누고 시작하고 싶어서 그렇게 할까 합니다. MK님, 서울은 눈이 많이 왔어요. 아, 그렇구나. 몇 센치 정도 나왔나요? 한국은 눈이 자주 오지 않아서 막 한꺼번에 많이 오면은 좀 도로가 위험하고 그런가요? 아모스님, 어제 라이브 끝나고 바로 산책 나가셨나봐요. 눈이 엄청 쌓였던데요. 네, 어제 라이브가 끝날 때쯤에요. 그 낭독 끝나고 나서 대부분이 이제 주무시는데 안 주무시는 분들이 몇몇 계세요, 보통. 그러면 그분들이랑 좀 그냥 잡담을 하는 시간이 있는데, 네, 고로케님이 그분이랑 운동 얘기가 나오다가 이게 어떻게 된 건지 모르겠는데 어쩌다 보니까 나 산책 가야겠다 이렇게 얘기가 흘러간 거예요. 그래서 근데 그냥 산책은 아니고요. 러킹이라고 그 무게를 지고 걷는 그런 운동인데요. 그래서 그거를 하게 됐습니다. 라이브 끝나자마자 간 건 아니고요. 사실 고민 좀 많이 하고 진짜 가기 싫다 생각하는데 그냥 갔어요. 눈이 쌓였던 건 제가 그래서 그 사진을 인스타그램에 올렸는데 그거를 말씀하시는 것 같습니다. 네, 아모스님께서 제가 사진이 찍혔던 그 부분은 사실 원래는 그게 물 웅덩이에요. 연못이라고 하기엔 조금 너무 큰데 또 호수는 아니고 하여간 네, 커다란 연못이거든요. 근데 춥고 이제 눈이 많이 내려와서 그 부분은 사람들이 지나다니지 않는 쪽. 그래서 제가 걸은 거는 사진에 나오지 않은 바깥쪽이고요. 너무 추웠어요. 영하 20도였는데 근데 사실 제 잘못이 큰 게 집에만 있다 보니까 밖에 추워서 잘 안 나가니까 이렇게 춥구나 이거를 잘 못 느끼고 옷은 그냥 그래도 두둑히 입고 갔는데 목이 너무 시렵더라고요. 스카프를 하고 갔어야 됐는데 어쨌건 네, 미션은 성공했습니다. 그리고 그렇게 하다 보니까 진짜 좀 잠이 더 잘 왔어요, 저는. 그래서 한국은 특히 가방 메고 거기다 무게 좀 넣고 걸어 다니면은 누구도 이상하게 보진 않잖아요. 그러니까 누구나 할 수 있는 운동으로서 네, 굉장히 추천드립니다. 지아코님 목소리가 너무 좋으세요. 감사합니다. 진주님, 지금 나흘째 눈이 많이 왔어요. 캘거리처럼 춥진 않아요. 거의 10인치, 25cm 쌓였어요. 오, 엄청 많이 왔네요. 어, 어우, 싫다. 네, 건투를 빕니다. 토토리님, 말만 들어도 춥네요. 아, 진짜 너무 추웠어요. 걸으면서 저 머릿속에 고로케님 왜 그러셨어요? 진짜. 네, 이혜진님, 책 1시간 이상 읽어주는 거 안 힘드시나요? 항상 궁금했는데 평소 여러 번 나눠 읽고 편집하신 줄 알았어요. 라이브 하시는 거 보니까 원테이크네요. 원래 네, 애지님이 말씀하신 것처럼 여러 번 나눠서 읽고 편집을 했었거든요. 근데 이제 제가 라이브 시작하기 전에는 영상 업로드 텀이 굉장히 뜸뜸했었는데 뭐 여러 가지 이유도 있지만 그중 하나가 시간이 날 때 떠올라야 녹음을 하는데 이제 녹음을 하고 나서 또 실수를 편집해야 되는데 그건 또 다음 시간에 하고 또 편집이 되면은 또 업로드를 또 다음에 또 하고 이게 그 한 번, 한 번, 한 번 스텝이 길어지니까 그냥 이렇게 빨리빨리 안 되더라고요. 그래서 인제 라이브로 시작을 하면서 저한테는 굉장히 더 편해진 게 그렇게 막 원큐에 읽으면 되고 에디팅 쪽에 제가 신경을 크게 쓰지 않으니까 그래서 음 개인적으로는 그게 더 편해요. 오히려 인제 실수를 하더라도 뭐 어쩔 수 없으니까요. 그냥 넘어가야 되니까. 그 막 실수를 했는데 이걸 편집할 수 있다 하면은 혼자 뭐랄까 강박관념까지는 아니더라도 '아 이거 나중에 편집해서 실수한 것들 이렇게 지워 버려야지.' 뭐 그런 생각이 없으니까 네 오히려 더 편한 것 같아요. 물론 장시간 읽는 거는 그것 나름의 뭐 어려움이라면 어려움이겠죠. 네 있긴 있어요. 근데 그냥 심적으로는 그게 더 편하고요. 뭐 네 성우로 일하면서 스크립트 읽고 막 이런 연습도 많이 했으니까 읽는 것 자체는 그렇게 어렵진 않은 것 같아요. 네, 아모스님, 구독자가 10만이 넘었는데 유튜브 광고도 안 받고 하시는 것이죠? 이게 그 몇 년 전에요. 유튜브가 제가 알기로는 유튜브가 구글 거죠. 근데 구글이 그 정책을 광고 정책을 좀 막 이리저리 바꿨다가 다시 뭐 했다가 해요. 그래서 얼마 몇 년 전까지는 인제 제가 영상이 나오는 광고를 안 받고 했어요. 근데 동영상 광고가 없었어도 배너라고 있거든요. 그 컴퓨터로 보면은 거기 배너 광고 이미지 뭐 이런 거 뜨게 네 듣는 분들의 방해를 하고 싶지 않아서 그렇게 했었는데요. 이것도 바뀐 지가 꽤 됐죠. 작년인가 재작년인가. 이제 그 영상 광고를 넣느냐 안 넣느냐 이게 제 선택이 안 되게 돼 버렸어요. 그래서 요즘에는 어떻냐면요. 너 이 영상으로 돈 벌 거야 말 거야. 근데 돈 벌 거예요." 하면은 그러면 "너 영상 광고 넣어야 돼." 그렇게 바뀌어 버렸거든요. 그 대신 이제 중간 광고는 아직도 제가 선택할 수 있어요. 중간 광고는 제가 넣지 않도록. 그래서 그렇게는 하고 있는데 사실 고민을 좀 많이 했거든요. 근데 현재로서는 그래서 인트로 광고랑 인제 영상 끝난 다음에 나오는 광고, 영상이 지금 포함된 상태입니다. 그래서 유튜브 광고를 받고 지금 하고 있는 거긴 한데요. 사실 뭐 그걸로 수익이 막 그렇게 많고 그렇진 않아요. 근데 네 그냥 고민이 많이 되는 부분이긴 합니다. 어쨌건 중간 광고를 넣느니 차라리 광고를 아예 빼고 싶은 게 제 마음인데요. 음 네 그렇습니다. 제가 말씀드리는 거는 네, 아모스님. 그렇군요. 간접 광고인가요? 제가 말씀드린 광고라는 거는요. 그 유튜브 프리미엄이 아닌 분들한테는 영상이 시작되기 전에 동영상 광고로 이렇게 되는 그런 경우가 있거든요. 그거를 제가 말씀드리는 거고요. 뭐 다른 협찬이라든지 이런 거는 없습니다. 그냥 혼자 하는 거고요. 네. 그러면 이제 진행하기에 앞서 아까 말씀드린 대로 댓글을 좀 읽어드리려고 합니다. 네, 토토리님께서 어제 라이브 못 들었지만 이렇게 올려주시니 너무 좋네요. 항상 감사해요. 라고 남겨주셨어요. 네, 감사합니다. 네, 토리0705님, 너무 반갑고 기쁩니다. 매일 밤 들으면서 잠들지요. 새로운 글들 올려주셔서 감사합니다. 잘 듣겠습니다. 화이팅입니다. 네, 저도 감사합니다. 토리님도 화이팅이고요. 생각이 너무 많은 어른들을 위한 심리학의 두 분이 글 올려주신 거예요. 야작 0008님, 어제 처음 듣고 오늘도 찾아왔어요. 잠도 안 오는데 영어 귀 트이라고 들어두고 해석하려고 집중하다가 잠들고 있어요. 영어도 듣고 잠도 자고 너무 좋아요. 영어 영상 많이 부탁드려요. 응원합니다. 네, 감사합니다. 이렇게 댓글로 남겨주셔서 저는 뭐가 좋아요, 뭐 앞으로 이렇게 해주세요, 글 남겨주시는 게 저한테 굉장히 큰 도움이 된답니다. 네, 그래서 오늘도 이렇게 영어 영상으로 찾아뵙게 되네요. 이선영 R4F님, 매일 밤 영어 이야기 들으며 잠이 든답니다. 부드럽고 편안한 목소리에 하루의 고단함이 다 녹아내린답니다. 감사합니다. 제가 감사하죠. 그렇게 잘 들어주셔서 네, 도움이 될 수 있어서 저도 참 감사합니다. 진주님도 네, 글 남겨주셨어요. 당연 주말엔 쉬어야죠. 영어 낭독 톤이 더 좋아요. 둘 다 좋지만 흐흐. 참고로 시애틀에서 인트로는 그대로 해주시기를 당부드려요. 네, 감사합니다. 진주님 지금 함께 하신 것 같은데요. 네, 인트로는 그대로 두길 한번 조금 더 고민을 해보겠습니다. 네, 밍미님, 나는 엄청 예민한 사람인데 이분이 숙면의 최고임. 네, 감사합니다. 네, 마지막 댓글 읽어드릴게요. 박희정 Q4Y님, 삶의 고단함의 터널을 겪으며 터널 끝에 빛이 있음을 잊지 않고 땀과 눈물의 진한함 뒤에 땀과 눈물의 진한함 뒤에 올 그 숨쉬는 시간 여정 속에서 오늘을 또 감사합니다. 굉장히 멋진 글이에요. 이거는 그냥 시인데요. 네, 박희정님, 멋진 글 남겨주셔서 감사합니다. 네, 진주님, 궁금한 광고 내용을 자세히 알게 됐어요. 네, 안드레아오님, 안녕하세요. 네, 안녕하세요. 수영 강습은 잘 다녀오셨나요? 어제 잠을 잘 못 주무신다고 끝까지 그 깨어있는 정예분들 중 한 분이셨는데, 까꿍님, 안녕하세요. 네, 저도 안녕하세요. 애지인님, 소설 많이 읽어주세요. 네, 그렇게 해보도록 하겠습니다. 한국 책은 아무래도 좀 제약이 더 많다 보니까 제가 출판사에 조금 더 열심히 여쭤보고 해야 되는데 그 부분을 제가 아직 잘 못하고 있습니다. 그래서 한번 그쪽으로 좀 노력을 더 해보겠습니다. 네, 감사합니다. 네, 읽기 전에 물 한 모금 마시고요. 네, 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 읽기 전에 애지님 책 추천 하나 해주시면 감사하겠습니다. 책 추천이요? 한국어로 아니면 영어로요? 까꿍님, 소년이 온다 읽어주시는 걸 상상해봤는데 벌써 슬프네요. 소년이 온다. 제가 적어 놓을게요. MK님, 이렇게 소통할 수 있어서 좋아요 라고 남기신 거겠죠? 끝에 오타가 좀 있어서. 네, 감사합니다. 저도 이게 사실 훨씬 좋아요. 애지님, 한국어로요. 제가 솔직히 한국어, 한글 책을 제가 잘, 음, 많이 읽어보지를 않아서 저도 사실 여러분들한테 소개해드리면서 같이 접하는 책들이 대부분인데, 어, 어떤 분야의 책 좋아하세요? 소설 좋아하시는 것 같은데, 제가 소설은 또, 읽어본 적이 앞으로 좀 더 읽어보려고 생각은 하고 있거든요. 제가 좋아하는 한국어로 번역된 소설을 제가 좀 말씀드리자면, 저는 몬테크리스토 백작이라는 작품을 굉장히 좋아합니다. 근데 이게 책이 엄청 길어요. 그리고 음, 네. 제가 요즘 읽고 있는 거는 어, 제목이 뭐더라? 돈키호테. 뭐 다들 아시는 책들이죠. 근데 이게 제가 고전을 좀 좋아하거든요. 그래서 요즘 나온 소설도 제가 좀 더 열심히 읽어야 되겠다 생각이 듭니다. 소설이 아닌 책은요, 매슈 워커의 우리는 왜 잠을 자는가라는 제목인지 뭐 비슷한 제목인데요. 밀리의 서재에 있거든요. 그 책 저는 추천드리고 싶습니다. 수면에 대한 좋은 어, 지식을 아실 수 있을 거예요. 저도 아직은 끝내지 못한 책인데 제가 사실 이것저것 막 찔러보고 끝내는 거는 좀 어려워하는 타입이라서 책을 막 여러 개 시작하고 그중에 끝내는 책은 뭐 많이 없고 그런 스타일이에요. 또 다음에 제가 읽어봐야 할 책은 피터 아티아라는 박사님이신데 건강 쪽에서 굉장히 되게 좋으신 분인 것 같아요. 그래서 그분의 책을 제가 또 읽어보려고 생각을 하고 있습니다만 한국어로 번역이 되었는지는 모르겠어요, 아직. 네, 아모스님, 책들을 읽어주면 소개도 되고 출판사는 오히려 도움이 될 텐데요. 아닌가 봐요. 근데 이게, 무슨 이유에서든지 출판사에서 허락하지 않으시는 경우도 꽤 있으세요. 그리고 제 채널 특성상 낭독되는 부분이 좀 많다 보니까 책을 소개하는 것도 있지만 아무래도 이 책을 제가 좀 더 잘 홍보해 드릴 수 있다면 거기에 대한 부응이 그만큼 있지 않을까 생각을 하고요. 사실 그래서도 라이브 방식이 제가 원래 올려드렸던 낭독만 있는 영상보다는 더 좋지 않을까 하는 기대를 마음 한켠에 두고 있습니다. 네, 선영호님, 목소리가 너무 좋아요. 쉽고 짧은 영어 원서로 추천해 주세요. 쉽고 짧은 영어 원서. 쉽고 짧은 영어 원서. 제가 이번 주 화요일에 읽어드렸던, 음, 이솝우화가 짧기는 한데요. 쉽지는 않아요. 이게 좀 옛날에 번역된 거라서요. 근데 최근 번역된 거를 접하실 수 있으면 최근 번역된 이솝우화를 영어로 접하실 수 있으면 아마 이야기마다 굉장히 짧고 이해하기도 편하실 거예요. 근데 이 쉽다는 기준 자체가 사람마다 이제 좀 다를 수 있기 때문에 개인적으로는 솔직히 어린이를 위한 책도 되게 좋다고 생각하거든요. 네. 저는 또 어린이 책을 사실 되게 좋아하긴 해요. 제가 최근에 접한 어린이 책은요. Frog and Toad라는 작품인데요. 정말 심플하고 너무 귀여운데 인제 생각하다 보면 굉장히 심오한 내용의 어린이 책인 것 같아요. 그래서 그건 Frog and Toad입니다. 애지님, 몬테크리스토 백작, 돈키호테, 매슈 워커, 우리는 왜 잠을 자는가, 피터 아티아 기억해두겠습니다. 감사합니다. 네, 아유 감사합니다. 저도 감사하고요. 애지님도 추천하시는 소설이 있으면 언제든지 알려주세요. 네, 진주님, 몬테크리스토 백작이 돈키호테보단 재밌어요. 정말 긴 장편이긴 하죠. 흐흐. 네, 맞아요. 저도 돈키호테는 인제 읽는 사람 입장에서 어 되게 위트 있고 유머러운 음 그런 말이 있잖아요. 제4의 장벽인가? 제4의 벽인가? 그거를 깨는 네. 저는 굉장히 피식피식 웃으면서 조금씩 읽어가고 있습니다. 하지만 몬테크리스토 백작이 제 마음엔 아직까지는 넘버 원인 것 같아요. 네, 그럼 데미안. 많이들 알고 계신 작품이죠. 근데 놀랍게도 전 한 번도 안 읽어봤습니다. 그래서 여러분들이랑 읽어보면서 함께 제 생각도 이제 쉴 때마다 좀 나누고 여러분 생각도 들어보고 이렇게 할 생각입니다. 그럼 낭독 시작하겠습니다. Demian by Hermann Hesse. The story of Emile Sinclair's youth. I wanted only to try to live in obedience to the promptings which came from my true self. Why was that so very difficult? In order to tell my story, I must begin far back. If it were possible, I should have to go back much further still, to the earliest years of my childhood, and even beyond to my distant ancestry. Authors in writing novels usually act as if they were God, and could, by a broadness of perception, comprehend and present any human story as if God were telling it to himself without veiling anything, and with all the essential details. That I cannot do, any more than can the authors themselves. But I attach more importance to my story than can any other writer to his, because it is my own, and it is the story of a human being, not that of an invented, possible, ideal, or otherwise non-existent creature, but that of a real, unique, living man. What that is, a real living man, one certainly knows less today than ever. For men are shot down in heaps, men of whom each one is a precious, unique experiment of nature. If we were nothing more than individuals, we could actually be put out of the world entirely with a musket ball. And in that case, there would be no more sense in relating stories. But each man is not only himself, he is also the unique, quite special, and in every case the important and remarkable point where the world's phenomena converge in a certain manner never again to be repeated. For that reason, the history of everyone is important, eternal, and divine. For that reason, every man, so long as he lives at all and carries out the will of nature, is wonderful and worthy of every attention. In everyone has the Spirit taken shape. In everyone creation suffers. In everyone is a Redeemer crucified. Few today know what man is. Many feel it, and for that reason die the easier, as I shall die the easier when I have finished my story. I must not call myself one who knows. I was a seeker and am still, but I seek no more in the stars or in books. I am beginning to listen to the promptings of those instincts which are coursing in my very blood. My story is not pleasant. It is not sweet and harmonious like the fictitious stories. It smacks of nonsense and perplexity, of madness and dreams, like the lives of all men who do not wish to delude themselves any longer. The life of everyone is a way to himself, the search for a road, the indication of a path. No man has ever yet attained to self-realization. Yet he strives thereafter, one ploddingly, another with less effort, each as best he can. Each one carries the remains of his birth, slime and eggshells of a primeval world, with him to the end. Many a one will remain a frog, a lizard, an ant. Many a one is top part man and bottom part fish. But everyone is a projection of nature into manhood. To us, all the same origin is common, our mothers. We all come out of the womb. But each of us, an experiment, one of nature's litter, strives after his own ends. We can understand one another, but each one is able to explain only himself. 네, 이렇게가 작품의 서문이라고 할까요? 인트로입니다. 잠깐 짧게 제가 이해한 걸 요약하자면 이 나레이터가 글쓴이가 말하길 나는 나의 이야기를 들려줄 거다. 근데 이 목소리 톤이 굉장히 비관적인 것 같아요. 제가 읽기로는. 그리고 다른 작가들에 대한 약간 비판적인 톤을 갖고 다른 사람들은 마치 그들 작품의 캐릭터에 대해 모든 걸 아는 것처럼 신처럼 전지전능하게 과거와 그 사람의 모든 걸 알고 있는 것처럼 말을 하지만 나는 나의 이야기를 할 것이다. 그리고 그들의 작품과 달리 나는 직접 나의 이야기를 하기 때문에 가능하다면 최대한 과거로 돌아가서 이야기를 시작하겠지만 그것은 불가능하다. 하지만 다른 작품들과 다르게 나의 이야기에는 진정성이 있다. 그리고 그 진정성으로 나의 이야기를 이해할 것이다. 이해할 수 없는 나의 이야기를 여러분들에게 풀어주겠다. 뭐 이런 내용인 것 같아요. 네, 넘어가겠습니다. 앞으로의 챕터는 아마 훨씬 길 거예요. Chapter 1. Two Worlds. I will begin my story with an event of the time when I was 10 or 11 years old and went to the Latin school of our little town. Much of the old-time fragrance is wafted back to me, but my sensations are not unmixed as I pass in review of my memories. Dark streets and bright houses and towers, the striking of clocks and the features of men, comfortable and homely rooms full of secrecy and dread of ghosts. I sense again the atmosphere of cozy warmth, of rabbits and servant girls, of household remedies and dried fruit. Two worlds passed there one through the other. From two poles came forth day and night. The one world was my home, but it was even narrower than that, for it really comprised only my parents. This world was for the most part very well known to me. It meant mother and father, love and severity, good example and school. It was a world of subdued luster, of clarity and cleanliness, Here were tender, friendly words, washed hands, clean clothes, and good manners. Here, the morning hymn was sung and Christmas was kept. In this world were straight lines and paths which led into the future. Here were duty and guilt, evil conscience and confession, pardon and good resolutions, love and adoration, Bible texts and wisdom. To this world our future had to belong. It had to be crystal pure, beautiful and well-ordered. The other world, however, began right in the midst of our own household, and was entirely different, had another door, another manner of speech, and made different promises and demands. In this second world were servant girls and workmen, ghost stories and breath of scandal. There was a gaily colored flood of monstrous, tempting, terrible, enigmatical goings-on, things such as the slaughterhouse and prison, drunken men and scolding women, cows and birth throes, plunging horses, tales of burglaries, murders, and suicides. All these beautiful and dreadful, wild and cruel things were round about, in the next street, in the next house. Policemen and tramps passed to and fro. Drunken men beat their wives. Crowds of young girls flowed out of factories in the evening. Old women were able to bewitch you and make you ill. Robbers dwelt in the wood. Incendiaries were rounded up by a mounted policemen. Everywhere seethed and reeked this second, passionate world, everywhere, except in our rooms, where mother and father were. And that was a good thing. It was wonderful that here in our house there were peace, order and repose, duty and a good conscience, pardon and love. And wonderful that there were also all the other things, all that was loud and shrill, sinister and violent, yet from which one could escape with one bound to mother. And the oddest thing was how closely the two worlds bordered each other, how near they both were. For instance, our servant Lena, as she sat by the sitting room door at evening prayers, and sang the hymn with her bright voice, her freshly washed hands laid on her smoothed-out apron, belonged absolutely to father and mother, to us, to what was bright and proper. Immediately after, in the kitchen or in the woodshed, when she was telling me the tale of the headless dwarf, or when she quarreled with the women of the neighborhood in the little butcher's shop, then she was another person, belonged to another world, and was enveloped in mystery. It was the same with everything and everyone, especially with myself. To be sure, I belonged to the bright, respectable world. I was my parents' child, but the other world was present in everything I saw and heard, and I also lived in it, although it was often strange and foreign to me, although one had there regularly a bad conscience and anxiety. Sometimes I even liked to live in the forbidden world best, and often the homecoming into the brightness, however necessary and good it might be, seemed almost like a return to something less beautiful, to something more uninteresting and desolate. At times, I realized this. My aim in life was to grow up like my father and mother, as bright and pure, as systematic and superior. But the road to attainment was long. You had to go to school and study and pass tests and examinations. The road led past the other dark world, through it, and it was not improbable that you would remain there and be buried in it. There were stories of prodigal sons to whom that had happened. I was passionately fond of reading them. There, the return home to father and to the respectable world was always so liberating and so sublime. I quite felt that this alone was right and good and desirable. But still, that part of the stories which dealt with the wicked and profligate was by far the most alluring, and if one had been allowed to acknowledge it openly, was really often a great pity that the prodigal repented and was redeemed. But one did not say that, nor did one actually think it. It was only present somehow or other as a presentiment or a possibility deep down in one's feelings. When I pictured the devil to myself, I could quite well imagine him down below the street, openly or in disguise, or at the annual fair or in the public house, but I could never imagine him with us at home. My sisters also belong to the bright world. It often seemed to me that they approached me more nearly to father and mother, that they were better and nicer mannered than myself, without so many faults. They had their failings, they were naughty, but that did not seem to me to be deep-rooted. It was not the same as for me, for whom the contact with evil was strong and painful, and the dark world so much nearer. My sisters, like my parents, were to be treated with regard and respect. If you had had a quarrel with them, your own conscience accused you afterwards as the wrongdoer and the cause of the squabble, as the one who had to beg pardon. For in opposing my sisters, I offended my parents, the representatives of goodness and law. There were secrets which I would much sooner have shared with the most depraved street urchins than with my sisters. On good, bright days, when I had a good conscience, it was often delightful to play with my sisters, to be gentle and nice to them, and to see myself under a halo of goodness. That was how it must be if you were an angel. That was the most sublime thing we knew, to be an angel, surrounded by sweet sounds and fragrance like Christmas and happiness. But oh, how seldom were such days and hours perfect. Often, when we were playing one of the nice, harmless, proper games, I was so vehement and impetuous that I was so annoyed at my sisters that we quarreled and were unhappy. Then, when I was carried away by anger, I did and said things, the wickedness of which I felt deep and burning within me, even while I was doing and saying them. Then came sad, dark hours of remorse and contrition. The painful moment when I begged pardon, then again a beam of light, a peaceful, grateful happiness without discord, for minutes or hours. I used to go to Latin school. The sons of the mayor and of the head forester were in my class and sometimes used to come to our house. They were wild boys, but still they belonged to the world of goodness and of propriety. In spite of that, I had close relations with neighbors' boys, children of the public school, whom in general we despised. With one of these, I must begin my story. One half-holiday, I was a little more than 10 at the time, I went out with two boys of the neighborhood. A public school boy of about 13 years joined our party. He was bigger than we were, a coarse and robust fellow, the son of a tailor. His father was a drunkard, and the whole family had had a bad reputation. I knew Frank Cromer well. I was afraid of him, and was very much displeased when he joined us. He had already acquired manly ways and imitated the gait and manner of speech of the young factory hands. Under his leadership, we stepped down to the bank of the stream and hid ourselves from the world under the first arch of the bridge. The little bank between the vaulted bridge wall and the sluggishly flowing water was composed of nothing but trash, of broken china and garbage, of twisted bundles of rusty iron wire and other rubbish. You sometimes found there some useful things. We had to search the stretch under Frank Cromer's direction, and show him what we found. He then either kept it himself or threw it away into the water. He bid us note whether the things were of lead, brass, or tin. Everything we found of this description he kept for himself, as well as an old horn comb. I felt very uneasy in his company, not because I knew that father would have forbidden our playing together had he known of it, but through fear of Frank himself. I was glad that he treated me like the others. He commanded, and we obeyed. It seemed habitual to me, although that was the first time I was with him. At last we sat down. Frank spat into the water and looked like a full-grown man. He spat through a gap in his teeth, directing the sputum in any direction he wished. He began a conversation, and the boys vied with one another in bragging of schoolboy exploits and pranks. I was silent, and yet, if I said nothing, I was afraid of calling attention to myself and inciting Cromer's anger against me. My two comrades had from the beginning turned their backs on me and had sided with him. I was a stranger among them, and I felt my clothes and manner to be a provocation. It was impossible that Frank should like me, a Latin schoolboy and the son of a gentleman, and the other two, I felt, as soon as it came to the point, would disown me and leave me in the lurch. At last, through mere fright, I also began to relate a story. I invented a long narration of theft, of which I made myself the hero. In a garden by the mill on the corner, I recounted, I had one night, with the help of a friend, stolen a whole sack of apples, and those none of the ordinary sorts, but russets and golden pippins, the very best. In the danger of the moment, I had recourse to the telling of this story, which I invented easily and recounted readily. In order not to have to finish off immediately, and so perhaps be led from bad to worse, I gave full scope to my inventive powers. One of us, I continued, always had to stand sentinel, while the other was throwing down apples from the tree, and the sack had become so heavy that at last we had to open it again and leave half the apples behind. But we returned at the end of half an hour and took the rest away with us. I hoped at the end to gain some little applause. I had warmed to my work and had let myself go in my narration. The two small boys waited quiet and expectant. But Frank Cromer looked at me penetratingly through half-closed eyes and asked me in a threatening tone, "Is that true?" "Yes," I said. "Really and truly?" "Yes, really and truly," I asserted defiantly, though inwardly I was stifling through fear. "Can you swear it?" I was terribly frightened, and I answered without hesitation, "Yes." "Then say, 'I swear by God and all that's holy.'" I said, "I swear by God and all that's holy." "Ah, Gwen," said he and turned away. I thought that everything was now all right and was glad when he got up and made for the town. When we were on the bridge, I said timidly that I must now go home. "Don't be in such a hurry," laughed Frank. "We both go the same way." He dawdled on, and I dared not tear myself away, especially as he was actually taking the road to our house. As we arrived, I looked at the heavy brass knocker, the sun on the window and the curtains in my mother's room, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Home at last. What a blessing it was to be at home again, to return to the brightness and peace of the family circle. As I quickly opened the door and slipped inside, ready to shut it behind me, Frank Cromer forced his way in as well. He stood beside me in the cool, dark stone corridor, which was only lighted from the courtyard, held me by the arm and said softly, "Not so fast, you." Terrified, I looked at him. His grip on my arm was one of iron. I tried to think what he had in his mind, whether he was going to maltreat me. I wondered if I should scream, whether anyone would come down quickly enough to save me, but I gave up the idea. "What's the matter?" I asked. "What do you want?" "Nothing much. I only want to ask you something. Something the others needn't hear." "Well, what do you want me to tell you? I must go upstairs, you know." "You know, don't you, whose orchard that is by the mill on the corner?" said Frank softly. "No, I don't know. I think it's the miller's." Frank had wound his arm round me, and he drew me quite close to him, so that I had to look up directly into his face. His look boded ill. He smiled maliciously, and his face was full of cruelty and power. "Now, kid, I can tell you whose garden it is. I have known for a long time that the apples had been stolen, and I also know that the man said he would give 2 marks to anyone who would tell him who stole the fruit." "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "But you won't tell him anything?" I felt it was useless to appeal to his sense of honor. He came from the other world. For him, betrayal was no crime. I felt that for a certainty. In these matters, people from the other world were not like us. "Say nothing?" laughed Cromer. "Look here, my friend. Do you think I'm minting money and can make 2-shilling pieces myself? I'm a poor chap, and I haven't got a rich father like yours. When I get the chance of earning 2 shillings, I must take it. You might even give me 1 more." Suddenly, he let me go free. Our house no longer gave me an impression of peace and safety. The world fell to pieces around me. He would report me as a criminal. My father would be told. Perhaps even the police might come for me. The terror of utter chaos menaced me. All that was ugly and dangerous was aligned against me. The fact that I had not stolen at all did not count in the least. I had sworn to it besides. Oh dear, oh dear. I burst into tears. I felt I must buy myself off. Despairingly, I searched all my pockets. Not an apple, not a penknife, absolutely nothing. All at once, I thought of my watch. It was an old silver one which wouldn't go. I wore it for no special reason. It came down to me from my grandmother. I drew it out quickly. "Cromer," I said, "listen, you mustn't give me away. That wouldn't be nice of you. Look here, I will give you my watch. I haven't anything else, worse luck. You can have it, it's a silver one. The mechanism is good. There's one little thing wrong, that's all. It needs repairing." He smiled and took the watch in his big hand. I looked at his hand and felt how coarse and hostile it was, how it grasped at my life and peace. "It's silver," I said timidly. "I wouldn't give a straw for your silver and your old watch," he said with deep scorn. "Get it repaired yourself." "But Frank," I exclaimed, quivering with fear lest he should go away. "Wait a minute, do take the watch. It's really silver, really and truly. I haven't got anything else." He gave me a cold and scornful look. "Very well then. You know who I'm going to, or I can tell the police. I know the surgeon very well." He turned to go. I held him back by the sleeve. I could not let that happen. I would much rather have died than bear all that would take place if he went away like that. Frank, I implored, hoarse with emotion, please don't do anything silly. Tell me it's only a joke, isn't it? Oh, yes, it's a joke, but it might cost you, dear. Do tell me, Frank, what to do. I'll do anything. He examined me critically through his screwed-up eyes and laughed again. Don't be silly, he said with affected affability. You know as well as I do, I've got the chance of earning a couple of marks. I'm not such a rich fellow that I can afford to throw it away. You know that well enough. But you're rich. Why, you've even got a watch. You need only to give me just 2 marks and everything will be all right. I understood his logic, but 2 marks. For me, that was as much and just as unobtainable as 10, as 100, as 1,000 marks. I had no money. There was a money box that my mother kept for me, with a couple of 10 and 5 penny pieces inside, which I received from my uncle when he paid us a visit, or from similar sources. I had nothing else. At that age, I received no pocket money at all. I have nothing, I said sadly. I have no money at all. But I'll give you everything I have. I've got a book about 10 red Indians, and also soldiers and a compass. I'll get that for you. But Cromer only screwed up his evil mouth and spat on the ground. Quit your jawing, he said commandingly. You can keep your old trash yourself. A compass. Don't make me angry, d'you hear? And hand over the money. But I haven't any. I never get money. I can't help it. Very well, then. You'll bring me the 2 marks in the morning. I shall wait for you in the market after school. That's all. If you don't bring any money, look out. Yes, but where shall I get it then? Good Lord, if I haven't any... There's enough money in your house. That's your business. Tomorrow after school, then. And I tell you, if you don't bring it... His eyes darted a terrible look at me. He spat again and vanished like a shadow. I could not go upstairs. My life was ruined. I wondered if I should run away and never come back, or go and drown myself. But these thoughts were not clearly formulated. I sat crouched in the dark on the bottom step, and I surrendered myself to my misfortune. There, Lena found me in tears as she came down with the basket to get wood. I begged her to say nothing on her return, and I went up. My father's hat and my mother's sunshade hung on the rack near the glass door. All these things reminded me of home and tenderness. My heart went out to them imploringly and grateful for their existence. I felt like the prodigal son when he looked into his old, homely room and sensed its familiar atmosphere. All this, the bright father and mother world, was mine no longer, and I was buried deeply and guiltily in the strange flood, ensnared in sinful adventures, beset by enemies and dangers, menaced by shame and terror. The hat and sunshade, the good old sandstone floor, the big picture over the hall cupboard, and the voice of my elder sister in the living room, all this was dearer and more precious to me than ever, but it was no longer consolation and secure possession. All of it was now a reproach. All this belonged to me no more. I could share no more in its cheerfulness and peace. I carried mud on my shoes that I could not wipe off on the mat. I brought shadows in with me, of which the home world had no knowledge. How many secrets had I already had, how many cares, but that was play. A mere nothing compared with what I was bringing in with me that day. Fate was overtaking me, hands were stretched out after me, from which even my mother could not protect me, of which she was to be allowed no knowledge. It was all the same, whether my offense was thieving or a lie. Had I not taken a false oath by God? My sin was not this or that. I had tendered my hand to the devil. Why did I follow him? Why had I obeyed Cromer more than ever I did my father? Why had I falsely invented the story of the theft? Why had I plumed myself on having committed a crime, as if it had been a deed of heroism? Now, the devil had me by the hand. Now the evil one was pursuing me. For a moment, I felt no further dread of the morrow, but I had the terrible certainty that my way was leading me further and further downhill and into the darkness. I realized clearly that from my wrongdoing, other wrongdoings must result, that the greetings and kisses I gave to my parents would be a lie, that a secret destiny I should have to conceal hung over me. For an instant, confidence and hope came to me like a lightning flash as I gazed at my father's hat. I would tell him everything, would accept his judgment and the punishment he might mete out. He would be my confidant and would save me. Confession was all that would be necessary, as I had made so many confessions before, a difficult, bitter hour, a serious, remorseful plea for forgiveness. How sweetly that sounded, how tempting that was. But nothing came of it. I knew that I should not do it. I knew that I had now a secret, that I was burdened with guilt, for which I myself would have to bear the responsibility alone. Perhaps I was at this very moment at the crossroads. Perhaps from this hour henceforth I should have to belong to the wicked, forever share secrets with the bad, depend on them, obey them, and become as one of themselves. I had pretended to be a man and a hero. Now I had to take the consequences. I was glad that my father, as he entered, found fault with my wet boots. It diverted his attention from something worse, and I allowed myself to suffer his reproach, secretly thinking of the other. That gave birth to a peculiar new feeling in me, an evil cutting feeling like a barbed hook. I felt superior to my father. I felt, for an instant's duration, a certain scorn of his ignorance. His scolding over the wet boots seemed to me petty. If only you knew, I thought, and looked upon myself as a criminal who is being tried for having stolen a loaf of bread, while he ought to confess to having committed murder. It was an ugly and repugnant feeling, yet strong and not without a certain charm, and it chained me to my secret and my guilt more securely than anything else. Perhaps Cromer has already gone to the police and given me away, I thought, and a storm is threatening to break over my head, while here I am looked upon as a mere child. This was the important and permanent element of the whole event up to this point of my narration. It was the first cleft into the sacredness of parenthood. It was the first split in the pillar on which my childhood had reposed, and which everyone must overthrow before he can attain to self-realization. The inward fundamental basis of our destiny is built up from these events, which no outsider observes. Such a split or cleft grows together again, heals up and is forgotten, but in the most secret chamber of the soul, it continues to live and bleed. I myself felt immediate terror in the presence of this new feeling. I would have liked to embrace my father's feet there and then to beg his forgiveness. But one cannot beg pardon for something fundamental, and a child knows and feels that as well and as deeply as any adult. I felt the need to think over the affair and to consider ways and means for the morrow. But I did not get around to it. My whole evening was taken up solely in accustoming myself to the changed atmosphere of our living room. Clock and table, Bible and looking glass, bookcase and pictures seemed all to be saying goodbye to me. With freezing heart, I had to stand by and watch my world, the good happy time of my life, sever itself from me, to be relegated to the past. I was forced to realize that I was being held fast to new sucking roots in the darkness of the unfamiliar world outside. For the first time, I tasted death, and death tasted bitter, for it is birth, with the terror and fear of a formidable renewal. I was glad to be lying at last in bed, but first I had passed through a purgatory in the form of evening prayers, and we had sung a hymn, one of my favorite ones. Alas, I did not join in, and each note was gall and poison for me. I did not join in the common prayer either. When my father gave the blessing, and when he finished, "Be with us all," I tore myself convulsively from the circle. The grace of God was with them all, but with me no longer. Cold and very tired, I went away. After I had lain a while in bed, wrapped around in warmth and safety, my troubled heart strayed back once again and fluttered uneasily in the past. Mother had wished me good night, as she always did. Her steps sounded yet in the room. The light of her candle gleamed through the crack in the door. Now, I thought, now she will come back again. She has felt my need. She will give me a kiss and will ask, in tones kind and full of promise, what is the matter? Then I can weep. The lump in my throat will melt away. I will throw my arms around her and will tell her, and everything will be right. I shall be saved. And when the crack in the door had become dark again, I still listened for a while and thought, she must come. She must. Then I came back to reality and looked my enemy in the face. I saw him clearly. He had one eye open. His mouth laughed uncouthly. While I gazed at him and the inevitable gnawed at my heart, he became bigger and more ugly, and his wicked eye lit up devilishly. He was close beside me until I dropped off to sleep. But I did not dream of him, nor of the day's events. I dreamed instead that we were in a boat, my parents, my sisters, and I, lapped in peace and the brightness of a holiday. I woke up in the middle of the night with the aftertaste of bliss. I still saw the white summer dresses of my sisters glistening in the sun, and then fell from my paradise back to reality, and the enemy with the wicked eye stood opposite me. I looked ill when Mother came in quickly in the morning and told me how late it was and wanted to know why I was still in bed, and when she asked what was the matter with me, I vomited. But I seemed to have gained a point. I rather liked to be somewhat ill and to be allowed to spend the morning in bed drinking chamomile tea, to listen to Mother clearing up the next room, and to hear Lena outside the corridor opening the door to the butcher. To stay away from morning school was rather like a fairy story, and the sun which played in the room was not the same you saw through the green curtains at school. But today, all this had lost its charm for me. It had a false ring about it. If I had died. But I was only slightly ill, as I had often been before, and nothing was gained by that. It prevented me from going to school, but it did not protect me in any way from Cromer, who would be waiting for me in the market at 11 o'clock, and Mother's friendliness was this time without comfort. It was burdensome and painful. I soon pretended to be asleep again, and thought the matter over, but all to no purpose. I had to be in the market at 11 o'clock. For that reason, I got up at 10 and said that I was better. As usual in such cases, I was told that either I must go back to bed or go to school in the afternoon. I said I would rather go to school. I had formed a plan. I dared not to go to Cromer without money. I had to get possession of the little savings box which belonged to me. There was not enough money in it, far from enough, I knew, but it was still a little, and something told me that a little was better than nothing, for at least Cromer had to be appeased. I felt horrible as I crept in my socks into my mother's room and took my box from her writing table. But it was not so horrible as the previous day's experience. My heart beat so fast I nearly died, and it was no better when I found at the first look, down below the stairs, that the box was locked. It was easy to break it open. It was only necessary to cut through a thin plate of tin. But the action caused me pain, for only in doing this was I committing theft. Up to then, I had only taken lumps of sugar and fruit on the sly. Now I had stolen something, although it was my own money. I realized I had taken a step nearer Cromer and his world, that I was slipping gradually downwards, and I adopted an attitude of defiance. The devil could run away with me if he liked. There was no way out. I anxiously counted the money. It had sounded so much in the box. Now in my hand, it was miserably little. There were 65 pennies. I hid the box in the basement, held the money in my closed fist, and went out of the house, with a feeling different from any with which I had ever left in the portal before. Someone called to me from above, I thought, but I went quickly on my way. There was still plenty of time. I sneaked by a roundabout way through the streets of a changed town, beneath clouds I had never seen before, by houses which seemed to spy on me, and people who suspected me. On the way, I recollected that one of my school friends had once found a thaler in the cattle market. I would have liked to pray to God to work a miracle and allow me to make such a treasure trove. But I had no longer the right to pray, and even then, the box would not be made whole again. Frank Cromer saw me in the distance. However, he came along very slowly and seemed not to be looking out for me. As he approached me, he beckoned me commandingly to follow. He passed on tranquilly, without once looking round, went down Straw Street and over the bridge, and stopped on the outskirts of the town in front of a new building. No one was working there. The walls stood bare, without doors or windows. Cromer looked round and then went through the doorway. I followed him. He stepped behind the wall, beckoned to me and stretched out his hand. "That makes 65 pennies," he said and looked at me. "Yes," I said timidly. "That's all I have. It's too little, I know, but it's all. I haven't any more." "I thought you were cleverer than that," he exclaimed, blaming me in what were almost mild terms. "Between men of honor, there must be honest dealing. I will not take anything from you except what is right. You know that. Take your pennies back there. The other, you know who, doesn't try to beat me down. He pays." "But I have absolutely nothing else. That was my money box." "That's your affair, but I don't want to make you unhappy. You still owe me 1 mark 35 penny. When can I have it?" "Oh, you will soon have it, certainly, Cromer. I don't know yet. Perhaps tomorrow or the day after. I shall have some more. You understand that I can't tell my father, don't you?" "That's no concern of mine. I don't want to harm you. If I liked, I could get the money before noon, you see, and I'm poor. You wear nice clothes and you get something better to eat for dinner than I do. But I won't say anything. I am willing to wait a few days. The day after tomorrow, in the afternoon, I will whistle for you. Then you will bring it along. You can recognize my whistle? He gave me a whistle that I had often heard before. Yes, I said, I know it. He went away, as if I didn't belong to him. It had been only a transaction between us, nothing further. Even today, I believe, Cromer's whistle would terrify me if I heard it again suddenly. From then on, I heard it often. It seemed I heard it continually and always. No place, no game, no work, no idea in which this whistle would not sound. I was dependent on it. It was now the messenger of my fate. On mild, glowing autumn afternoons, I was often in our little flower garden, which I loved dearly. A peculiar impulse made me take up again boyish games which I had played formerly. I played, as it were, that I was a boy who was younger than I, who was still good and free, innocent and secure, but in the middle of the game, always expected, and yet always terribly disturbing and surprising sounded Cromer's whistle, destroying the picture of my imagination. Then I had to go. I had to go follow my tormentor to evil and ugly places, had to render an account and let myself be dunned. The whole business may have lasted a few weeks, but it seemed to me like a year, or an eternity. I seldom had money, a 5 or 10 penny piece stolen from the kitchen table when Lena left the market basket standing there. Each time I was blamed by Cromer and heaped with abuse. It was I who deceived him and kept back what was his due. It was I who robbed him and made him unhappy. Seldom in life has need so oppressed me. Seldom have I felt a greater helplessness, a greater dependence. I had filled up the savings box with toy money. No one made any inquiries, but that as well could be discovered any day. I was even more afraid of Mother than of Cromer's harsh whistle, especially when she stepped up to me softly. Was she not going to ask me about the money box? As I presented myself to my evil genius several times without money, he began to torment and to make use of me after a different fashion. I had to work for him. He had to see to various things for his father. I did that for him, or he made me do something more difficult, hop on one leg for 10 minutes, or fasten a scrap of paper on the coat of a passerby. Many nights these torments realized themselves in my dreams, and I wept and broke out in a cold sweat in my nightmare. For a time I was ill. I often vomited and felt cold, but at night I lay in a fever, bathed in perspiration. Mother felt that something was wrong and displayed much sympathy on my behalf, but this tortured me because I could not respond by confiding in her. One evening, after I had already gone to bed, she brought me a piece of chocolate. This action was a souvenir of former years when, if I had been good, I was often rewarded in this way before going off to sleep. Now she stood there and held a piece of chocolate out to me. This so pained me that I could do nothing but shake my head. She asked me what was the matter with me and stroked my hair. I could only sob out, "Nothing, nothing, I won't have anything." She put the chocolate on my bed table and went away. When she wished subsequently to question me on the matter, I made as if I knew nothing of it. Once she brought the doctor to me, who examined me and prescribed cold ablutions in the morning. My state at that time was a sort of insanity. I was shy and lived in a torment, like a ghost in the midst of the well-ordered peace of our house. I had no part in the others' lives, and could seldom, even for as much as an hour, forget my miserable existence. In the presence of my father, who often took me to task in an irritated fashion, I was reserved and wrapped up in myself. 네, 이렇게가 1장의 끝입니다. 네, 잠깐 쉬면서 목을 좀 축이겠습니다. 네, 일단 지금까지 읽어본 거를 한번 요약해 볼게요. 제가 잊어버리기 전에. 그래서 전 이 작품을 읽어보지 않았기 때문에 그냥 저도 아마 여러분들은 이걸 알고 계시는 분들도 많이 계시겠지만 저는 이제 제가 그냥 배우는 대로 요약한 내용입니다. 아무래도 이 책의 저자는, 그러니까 나레이터는 이 작품의 주인공인 것 같아요. 그리고 이 주인공은 아직 이름이 나오진 않았는데 인트로에서 나는 나에 대한 이야기를 하겠다. 다른 작가들은 그들의 이야기를 쓸 때 마치 그들의 모든 것을 알고 있는 것처럼, 그들의 모든 과거를 알고 있는 것처럼 쓰지만 나는 나의 이야기, 완벽하지 않은, 내가 이해하지 못하는, 그리고 내가 전부 알지 못하는 과거부터 시작하겠다. 가능하다면 그 이전의 과거부터 시작하고, 또 가능하다면 내 선조부터 이야기를 시작하겠지만 그것은 불가능하다. 뭐 이런 식으로 인트로를 끝내고 그 다음에 본인의 어린 시절을 우리에게 알려주고 있는 것 같습니다. 이 나레이터가 설명하는 이 세계는 굉장히 어찌 보면 이분법적이죠. 동전의 양면이라고 볼 수도 있고, 뭐 흑과 백의 세계가 정말 깔끔하게 나뉘어져 있는 그런 모습을 우리에게 그려준 것 같습니다. 아무래도 꽤나 잘 사는 부유층의 부모님 아래에서 자라면서 그때 그 시대의 고급 교육을 받았고, 본인이 생각하기에 그 당시에 본인의 집은 백을, 흑과 백에서 백을 완벽한 백을 의미했다. 부모님, 어머니와 아버지, 그리고 나레이터의 자매들은 그 완벽한 세상을 의미했다. 선하고 사랑이 가득하고 평화롭고, 그리고 본인의 삶 동안 평화로웠지만 그의 반면에 백과 정반대인 흑의 세계도 공존하고 있었다. 집 밖으로 나가보면 볼 수 있는 집 없는 사람들, 다른 길거리에서 일하는 사람들, 아니면 아침부터 일을 해야 하는 여자들, 이런 세상. 한편으로는 백의 세계에 살면서 안심함을 느꼈지만 또 다른 한편으로는 흑의 세계에 점점 이끌렸다. 흑의 세계에 이끌리는 무언가가 있었다. 그렇게 본인의 이야기를 시작합니다. 제가 기억하기로는요. 그런데 어느 날 이 나레이터한테 새로운 친구가 생깁니다. 사실 말이 친구지. 괴롭힘을 당하는 큰 아이죠. 큰 아이라는 게 나이가 좀 더 많았다고 얘기가 나왔던 것 같은데 정확히는 기억은 안 나지만요. 어쨌건 체구는 더 크고 이제 가난한 집에서 자란 좀 많이 거친 아이를 본인 나레이터와 나레이터의 친구들끼리 어울리기 시작한 그 장면부터 갈등이 시작되는 것 같습니다. 그래서 어느 날은 이 체구가 큰 아이를 체구가 큰 아이에게 이렇게 리더가 됐는데 이 리더가 된 아이를 샤바샤바하기 위해서 이런저런 이야기를 하는데 나레이터 본인은 이야기를 뭐 하기가 너무 싫어서 가만히 있다가 본인한테 주목을 끌기 싫어서 결국에 거짓말을 하죠. 한 사과 농장에서 아니 농장이 아니라 과목원인가요? 뭐 어쨌건 그 사과를 훔친 이야기를 합니다. 그래서 굉장히 살을 굉장히 기발하게 이 이야기를 지어내는데요. 그거를 이 괴롭히는 나쁜 아이가 이 이름은 크로머인데 크로머가 너 이거 거짓말 아니지? 이런 식으로 계속 확인하는 거죠. 결국에는 이제 그 두 아이가 집으로 돌아가는데 하필이면 크로머랑 나레이터랑 집 가는 길이 똑같습니다. 같은 방향입니다. 그래서 이제 크로머랑 이 나레이터랑 집으로 돌아가는데 나레이터는 집으로 들어가자마자 너무 다행인 거죠. 그냥 이 흙의 세계에서 살아왔던 이 아이와 어울려야 한다는 게 너무 고역이었던 겁니다. 사실 흙의 세계라서 그런 거라고 보긴 어려울 것 같지만 이제 이 크로머라는 아이가 의미하는 어쨌건 그 괴롭힘에서 벗어났기 때문에 근데 아니나 다를까 크로머가 집까지 따라온 겁니다. 그래서 집까지 따라와서 너 내가 이 사과 훔쳤다고 했지? 그리고 아까 아이들 앞에서 얘기를 할 때 이 크로머라는 애가 너 네가 훔쳤다는 거 맹세할 수 있어? 이렇게 물었거든요. 그래서 크로머가 맹세하겠다고 했었어요. 집까지 따라온 크로머가 이렇게 얘기합니다. 너 이 사과 네가 훔친 거 주인이 나 누군지 알거든? 그리고 이 주인이 나한테 이 얼마 이 마크를 준다고 했어. 2실링인가요? 하여간 돈을 얼마 준다고 했어. 너 어떻게 할 거야? 그때부터 약점이 잡히면서 괴롭힘이 시작한 거죠. 잠깐만. 세지님 집착 보이 크로머. 아, 너무하잖아요. 네, 잠깐만요. 어쨌건, 네, 그때부터 집착이 시작됩니다. 그리고 그때부터, 나레이터의 약간 어린 아이의, 이게 말을 뭐라고 하나요? 이노센스가 왜 어린아이들은 딱 보면은, 착하다, 되게 흠없고 되게 깨끗한 양심을 갖고 있다 하잖아요. 근데 거기에서부터 이때를, 네, 순수함 맞아요. 세진님, 감사합니다. 어린아이의 이 순수함이 크로머로부터 인해 이 시점으로 점점 멀어지게 됩니다. 어찌 보면 성장의 과정이라고 볼 수도 있고, 어찌 보면 백의 세상에서 흙으로, 진짜 흑화되는 그 모습의 시작일 수도 있죠. 네, 집착보의 크로머. 너무 미워요. 그리고 사실 그 사과 나무 주인을 알고 있다는 말, 그것도 거짓말일 가능성이 높겠죠. 지금까지 읽어본 바로는 네, 제 의견은 그렇습니다. 크로마 참 밉네요. 물 좀 마시고 네, 채팅으로 글 다신 분들 좀 읽어드리겠습니다. 네, 도토리님 낭독 시작. 네, 진주님 이소부화 됐다. 잠 잘 잤어요. 네, 잘 됐네요. 잘하셨어요. 아장님 영어 편 너무 좋아요. 라이브도 하시는군요. 네, 감사합니다. 도토리님 귀가 안 트여서 영어 편은 이해하기 어렵지만 요약해 주셔서 감사합니다. 네, 별 말씀을요. 저도 감사합니다. 황주부 별주고 아니고님 오늘도 굿밤 감사합니다. 네, 굿밤 하세요. 고로케님 고로케님 또 뵙네요. 와, 매일 라이브 하시네요. 대단하십니다. 오늘은 데미안이라니 너무 좋네요. 이전 클립에서 말씀하셨던 것처럼 따로 녹음 편집해서 올리는 것보다 이렇게 라이브로 하시는 게 여러모로 효율적이고 소통하기에도 좋은 것 같아요. 취침 시간에 늘 신세 많이 지고 있네요. 흐흐, 감사드려요. 그리고 다음에 또 글 올리셨어요. 고로케님. 방금 전에 들어와서 인트로 부분 따로 들어봤는데 오늘 운동을 하셨네요. 뭔가 성실 바이러스에 전염될 듯한. 저도 내일 3km 걷기 뛰기 섞어서 실행해 보겠습니다. 유유. 내일을 위해 저는 이만 먼저 기절하도록 할게요. 흐흐, 감사합니다. 네, 고로케님. 고로케님, 저도 고로케님, 덕분에라 해야 될지 때문에라 해야 될진 모르겠지만 어제 진짜 그렇게 얘기가 안 나왔으면 절대 안 갔을 텐데 그래도 덕분에 가게 됐습니다. 감사합니다. 내일 운동을 가신다고 3km 걷기 뛰기 섞어서 하신다고 대단하신 결심이고요. 꼭 내일 또 뵙게 되면 여쭤볼 겁니다. 네, 근데 날씨가 추우니까요. 이제 너무 무리하지 마시고요. 따뜻하게 입고 네, 하시길 응원합니다. 괜찮을 거예요. 저도 추웠는데. 근데 참고로 전 30분만 했어요. 길게는 안 했어요. 한 1시간 할까 했는데 너무 추웠거든요. 아무튼 마감은 잠 잘 마치셨으리라. 네, 어제 마감 잘 마치셨으리라 믿고 응원합니다. 안녕히 주무세요. 틴틴님, 다 알아듣진 못해도 포근한 목소리에 잠을 청해봅니다. 네, 감사합니다. 화이팅입니다. 세진님, 산책 인증하신 게시물 봤습니다. 추운데 대단하십니다. 저도 이제 많은 분들의 운동 자극 덕분에 좀 걸었지만 낮잠을 자버렸습니다. 오늘도 잠들이님의 도움을 받아보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 응원합니다. 저도 뭐 대단한 건 아니고요. 그냥, 그냥 일단, 아이, 말 나왔으니까 가야지 싶어서 갔는데, 걷다 보니까 너무 추운데 일단 걷고 있으니까 오기로 그냥, 그래도 끝내야지 싶어서 그냥 그렇게 했네요. 네, 세시님도 운동 자극 받고 걸으셨다고 했는데, 대단해요. 그렇게 시작하는 거죠. 낮잠을 잘 수 있다는 것 또한 큰 축복 아닙니까? 네, 오늘도 굿밤 하시길 바라겠습니다. 달달아님, 안녕하세요. 또 잠 못 들고 찾아왔네요. 눈 감고 들을게요. 네, 달달아님, 잠 못 드는 밤이네요, 오늘도. 네, 눈 감고 편안한 마음으로 들으셨으면 좋겠습니다. 어떻게 제가 조금이나마 도움이 될 수 있으면 좋겠는데, 잠 못 드는 거 참 고역이죠. 어쨌건 빠른 시간 안에 잠들 수 있도록 제가 네, 희망하겠습니다. 네, 한 장을 아마 더 읽고 오늘 낭독을 한번 끝내보도록 할까 합니다. 이게 장 하나하나가 생각보다 꽤 길어서요. 아마 이 장을 끝내면 아, 얼마나 걸릴지 잘은 모르겠네요. 어쩌면 이 장 읽고 이 장 끝내기 전에 낭독이 끝내야 할 수도 있을 것 같은데 일단은 계속 진행해 보겠습니다. Chapter 2, Cain. Deliverance from my troubles came from quite an unexpected quarter, and with it something new entered into my life, which has up to the present day exercised a strong influence. A short time before we had had a new boy at our Latin school. A short time before, we had had a new boy at our Latin school. He was the son of a well-to-do widow who had moved to our town. He was in mourning and wore a crepe band round his sleeve. His form was above mine, and he was several years older. But I soon began to take notice of him, as did all of us. This remarkable boy impressed one as being much older than he looked. He made on no one on the impression of being a mere schoolboy. With us childish youngsters, he was as distant and as mature as a man, or rather, as a gentleman. He was by no means popular. He took no part in the games, much less in the fooling. It was only the self-conscious and decided tone which he adopted towards the masters that pleased the others. His name was Max Demian. One day it happened, as it occasionally did in our school, that for some cause or other class was sent into our large schoolroom. It was Damian's form. We little ones were having biblical history. The big ones had to write an essay. While we were having the story of Cain and Abel knocked into us, I kept looking across at Damian, whose face fascinated me strangely, and saw his wise, bright, more than ordinarily strong features bent attentively and thoughtfully over his task. He did not look at all like a schoolboy doing an exercise, but like a research worker solving a problem. I did not find him really agreeable. On the contrary, I had one or two little things against him. With me, he was too distant and superior. He was much too provokingly sure of himself, and the expression of his eyes was that of an adult, which children never like, rather sad with occasional flashes of scorn. Yet, I could not resist looking at him, whether I liked him or not. But the minute he looked in my direction, I looked away, somewhat frightened. If today I consider what he looked like as a schoolboy, I can say that he was in every respect different from the others, and bore the stamp of a striking personality, and therefore attracted attention. But at the same time, he did everything to prevent himself from being remarked. He bore and conducted himself like a disguised prince who finds himself among peasant boys and makes every effort to appear like them. He was behind me on the way home from school. When the others had run on, he overtook me and said, "Hello." Even his manner of greeting, although he imitated our schoolboy tone of voice, was polite and like that of a grown-up person. "Shall we go a little way together?" he questioned in a friendly way. I was flattered and nodded. Then I described to him where I lived. "Oh, there," he said laughingly. "I know the house already. There is a remarkable work of art over your door, which interested me at once." I did not guess immediately to what he was referring, and was astonished that he seemed to know our house better than I did. There was indeed a sort of crest which served as a keystone over the arch of the door, but in course of time it had become faint and had often been painted over. As far as I knew, it had nothing to do with us or with our family. I don't know anything about it, I said timidly. It's a bird or something like it. It must be very old. They say that the house at one time belonged to the abbey. Very likely, he nodded. We'll have another good look at it. Such things are often interesting. It is a hawk, I think. We continued our way. I was considerably embarrassed. Suddenly, Damien laughed, as if something funny had struck him. Oh, I was present at your lesson, he said with animation. The story of Cain, who carried the mark on his forehead, was it not? Do you like it? Generally, I used to not like anything of all the things we had to learn. But I did not dare to say so. It was as though a grown-up person were talking to me. I said I liked the story very much. Damien tapped on me on the shoulder. No need to impose on me, old fellow, but the story is really rather remarkable. I think it is much more remarkable than most of the others we get at school. The master didn't say very much about it, only the usual things about God and sin, etc. But I believe, he broke off, smiled, and questioned, but does it interest you? Well, he continued, I think one can conceive this story of Cain quite differently. Most things we are taught are certainly quite true and right, but one can consider them all from a different standpoint from the masters, and most of them have a much better meaning then. For instance, we can't be quite content with the explanation given us with regard to this fellow Cain and the mark on his forehead. Don't you find it so too? It certainly might happen that he should kill one of his brothers in a quarrel. It is also possible that he should afterwards be afraid and have to come down a peg. But that he should be singled out into the bargain with a decoration for his cowardice, which protects him and strikes terror into everyone else, that is really rather odd. Certainly, I said, interested. The case began to interest me. But how else should one explain the story? He clapped on the shoulder. Quite simply, the essential fact and the point of departure of the story was the sign. Here was a man who had something in his face which terrified other people. They did not dare to molest him. He made a big impression on them, he and his children. Perhaps, or rather certainly, it was not really a sign on his forehead like an office stamp. Things are not as simple as that in real life. I would sooner think it was something scarcely perceptible, of a peculiar nature. A little more intelligence and boldness in his look than people were accustomed to. This man had power. Other people shrank from him. He had a sign. One could explain that as one wished. And one always wishes what is convenient and agrees with one's opinions. People were afraid of Cain's children. They had a sign. And so they explained the sign not as it really was, a distinction, but as the contrary. The fellows with this sign were said to be peculiar, and they were courageous as well. People with courage and character are always called peculiar by other people. What a race of fearless and peculiar men should rove about was very embarrassing. That a race of fearless and peculiar men should rove about was very embarrassing. And so people attached a surname and a story to this race in order to revenge themselves on it, in order to compensate themselves more or less for all the terror with which it had inspired them. Do you understand? Yes, that means to say, then, that Cain was not at all wicked, and the whole story in the Bible isn't really true? Yes and no. Such ancient, primitive stories are always true, but they have not always been recorded and explained in the proper manner. In short, I mean that Cain was a thundering good fellow, and this story got attached to his name simply because people were afraid of him. The story was merely a report, something people might have set going on a gossiping way, and it was true insofar as Cain and his children did actually wear a sort of sign and were different from most people. I was much astonished. And do you believe, then, that the affair of the murder is absolutely untrue? I asked, much impressed. Not at all. It is certainly true. The strong man killed the weak one. One may doubt, of course, whether it was really his brother or not. It is not important, for, in the end, all men are brothers. A strong man, then, has killed a weak one. Perhaps it was a deed of heroism, perhaps it was not. But in any case, the other weak people were terrified. They lamented and complained, and when they were asked, why don't you simply kill him as well, they did not answer, because we are cowards. But when they were asked, why don't you simply kill him as well, they did not answer because we are cowards, but they said instead, you can't, he has a sign, God has singled him out. The humbug must have arisen something after this style. Oh, I am keeping you from going in. Goodbye, then. He turned into Old Street and left me alone, more astonished than I had ever been before. Scarcely had he gone when everything that he had said seemed to me quite unbelievable. Cain, a noble fellow, Abel, a coward. Cain's sign a distinction. It was absurd. It was blasphemous and infamous. What was God's part in this matter? Had he not accepted Abel's sacrifice? Did he not love Abel? Damian's story was nonsense. I suspected him of making fun of me and of wishing to mislead me. The devil of a clever fellow. And he could talk, but, well. Still, I had never thought so much about any of the biblical or other stories before. And for some time past, I had never so completely forgotten Frank Cromer, for hours, for a whole evening. At home, I read through the story once again as it stands in the Bible, short and clear. It was quite foolish to try to find a special, secret meaning. If it had one, every murderer could look upon himself as a favorite of God. No, it was nonsense. But Damian had a nice way of saying such things, so easily and pleasantly, as if everything were self-evident. And then his eyes. My ideas were certainly a little upset, or rather, they were very much confused. I had lived in a bright, clean world. I myself had been a sort of Abel. And now I was so firmly fixed on the other and had sunk so deeply. But really, what could I do to help it? What was my position now? A reminiscence glowed in me which, for the moment, almost took away my breath. I remembered that wretched evening, from which my present misery dated, when I looked for an instant into the heart of my father's bright world and despised his wisdom. Then I was Cain, and bore the sign. I imagined that it was in no way shameful, but a distinction, and in my wickedness and unhappiness, I stood on a higher level than my father, higher than good and pious people. It was not in such a clear-thinking way that my experience then presented itself to me, but all this was contained therein. It was only a flaming up of feeling, of strange emotions, which caused me pain and yet filled me with pride. When I considered the matter, I saw how strangely Damian had spoken of the fearless and the cowards. How curiously he had explained the mark on Cain's forehead. How singularly his eyes had lit up, those peculiar eyes of a grown person. And indistinctly, it shot through my brain. Is not he himself, this Damian, a sort of Cain? Why did he defend him if he did not feel like him? Why had he this force in his gaze? Why did he speak so scornfully of the others, of the fearsome, who are really the pious and the well-considered of God? This thought led me to no definite conclusion. A stone had fallen into the well, and the well was my young soul. And this business with Cain, the murderer and the sign, was for a very long time, the point from which my seekings after knowledge, my doubts and my criticisms took their departure. I noticed that the other boys also occupied themselves a good deal with Demian. I had not told anyone of his version of the story of Cain, but he appeared to interest the others as well. At least, many rumors concerning the new boy became current. If only I still knew all of them, each would help to throw fresh light on him. Each would serve to interpret him. I only remember the first rumor was that Damian's mother was very rich. It was also said that she never went to church, nor the son either. Another rumor had it that they were Jews, but they could just as easily have been, in secret, Mohammedans. Furthermore, tales were told of Max Demian's strength. So much was certain that the strongest boy in his form, who challenged him to a fight, and who, at his refusal, branded him coward, suffered a terrible humiliation at his hands. Those who were there said that Demian had simply taken him by the nape of the neck with one hand and had brought such a pressure to bear that the boy went white and afterwards crawled away, and that for several days he was unable to use his arm. For a whole evening, a rumor even ran that he was dead. For a time, everything was asserted and believed, everything that was exciting and wonderful. Then there was a satiety of rumors for a while. A little later, new ones circulated, which asserted that Demian had intimate relationships with the girls and knew everything. Meanwhile, my affair with Frank Cromer took its inevitable course. I could not get away from him, for altogether he left me in peace for days together. I was still bound to him. In my dreams he lived as my shadow, and thus my fantasy credited him with actions which he did not in reality do. So that in dreams I was absolutely his slave. I lived in these dreams. I was always a deep dreamer, more than in reality. These shadowy conceptions wasted my strength and my life force. I often dreamed, among other things, that Cromer ill-treated me, that he spat on me and knelt on me, and, what was worse, that he led me to commit grave crimes, or rather, I was not led, but simply forced, through his powerful influence. The most terrible of these dreams, from which I woke up half-mad, presented itself as murderous attack on my father. Cromer whetted a knife and put it in my hand, as we were standing behind the trees of a lane and lying in wait for someone whom I knew not. But when someone came along and Cromer, through a pressure of the arm, informed me that this was the man whom I was to stab, it turned out to be my father. Then I woke up. With all these troubles, I still thought a great deal about Cain and Abel, but much less about Demian. It was, strangely enough, in a dream that he first came in contact with me again. I dreamed once more of assault and ill treatment which I suffered, but instead of Cromer, this time it was Demian who knelt upon me. And, what was quite new and profoundly impressive, everything that I suffered resistingly and in torment at the hands of Cromer, I suffered willingly from Demian, with a feeling which was composed as much of joy as of fear. I had this dream twice. Then Cromer occupied his old position in my thoughts. For a long time, I have not been able to separate what I experienced in these dreams from what I underwent in reality. But in any case, my evil relation with Cromer took its course, and was by no means at an end when I had at last, by petty thefts, paid the boy the sum owed. No, for now he knew of these thefts, as he always asked me where the money came from, and I was more in his hands than ever. He frequently threatened to tell my father everything, and my terror was then scarcely as great as the profound regret that I had not myself done that in the very beginning. However, miserable as I was, I did not repent of everything, at least not always, and sometimes felt, I thought, that things could not have helped being as they were. The hand of fate was upon me, and it was useless to want to break away. I conjecture that my parents suffered not a little in these circumstances. A strange spirit had come over me. I no longer fitted into our community, which had been so intimate, and for which I often felt a maddening homesickness as for a lost paradise. I was treated, particularly by mother, more like a sick person than like a miserable wretch. But the actual state of affairs I was able to observe best in the conduct of my two sisters. It was quite evident from their behavior, which was very considerate, and which yet caused me endless pain, that I was a sort of person possessed, who was more to be pitied than blamed for his condition, but yet in whom evil had taken up residence. I felt that I was being prayed for in a different way from formerly, and realized the fruitlessness of these prayers. I often felt burning within me an intense longing for relief, an ardent desire for a full confession, and yet I realized in advance that I should not be able to tell everything to father and mother properly. In explanation of my conduct, I knew that I should be received in a friendly way, that much consideration and compassion would be shown me, but that I should not be completely understood. The whole affair would have been looked upon as a sort of backsliding, whereas it was really the work of destiny. I know that many people will not believe that a child scarcely 11 years old could feel thus. But I am not relating my affairs for their benefit. My narration is for those who know mankind better. The grown-up person who has learned to convert part of his feelings into thoughts feels the absence of these ideas in a child, and comes to believe that the experiences are likewise lacking. But they have seldom been so vivid, and not often in my life have I suffered as keenly as then. One rainy day, I was ordered by my tormentor to Castle Place, and there I stood, waiting and digging my feet into the wet chestnut leaves, which were still falling regularly from the black, dripping branches. Money I had none, but I had brought with me 2 pieces of cake that I had stolen in order to at least be able to give Cromer something. I had long since been accustomed to stand about in any odd corner, waiting for him often for a very long time, and I put up with the unalterable. Cromer came at last. That day he did not stay long. He poked me several times in the ribs, laughed, took the cake, and even offered me a moldy cigarette, which, however, I did not accept. He was more friendly than usual. "Oh," he said, as he went away, "before I forget, next time you can bring your sister along, the elder one. What's her name? Now, tell the truth." I did not understand and gave no answer. I only looked at him wonderingly. "Don't you get me? You must bring your sister along." "But Cromer, that won't do. I mustn't do that. And besides, she wouldn't come." I thought this was only another pretext for vexing me. He often did that, requiring me to do something impossible and so terrifying me. And often, after humiliating me, he would by degrees become more tractable. I then had to buy myself off with money or with some other gift. This time he was quite different. He was really not at all angry at my refusal. "Well," he said airily, "you'll think about it, won't you? I should like to make your sister's acquaintance. It will not be so difficult. You simply take her out for a walk, and then I come along. Tomorrow I'll whistle for you, and then we can talk more about it." When he had gone, a glimpse of the meaning of his request dawned on me. I was still quite a child, but I knew by hearsay that boys and girls, when they were somewhat older, did things which were forbidden, things of a secret and scandalous nature. And now I should also have to. It was suddenly quite clear to me how monstrous it was. I immediately resolved never to do that. But I scarcely dared think of what would happen in that case and how Cromer would revenge himself on me. A new torment began. I had not yet been tortured enough. I walked disconsolately across the empty square, my hands in my pockets, fresh torments, a new servitude. Suddenly, a fresh, deep voice called to me. I was terrified and began to run on. Someone ran after me. A hand gripped me from behind. It was Max Demian. I let myself be taken prisoner. I surrendered. "It's you?" I said uncertainly. "You frighten me so." He looked at me, and never had his glance been more like that of an adult, of a superior and penetrating person. For a long time past, we had not spoken with one another. "I am sorry," he said in his courteous and at the same time very determined manner. "But listen, you mustn't let yourself be frightened like that." "Oh, that can happen sometimes." "So it appears. But look here. If you shrink like that from someone who hasn't hurt you, then this someone begins to think. It makes him curious. He wonders what can be the matter. This somebody thinks to himself, how awfully frightened you are, and he thinks further. One is only like that when one is terrified. Cowards are always frightened. But I believe you aren't really a coward. Ain't I right? Of course, you aren't a hero either. There are things of which you are afraid. There are also people of whom you are afraid. And I should never be. No one should ever be afraid of other people. You aren't afraid of me? Or are you, perhaps?" "Oh, no, of course not." "There, you see. But there are other people you are afraid of?" I don't know. Let me go. What do you want from me?" He kept pace with me. I was going quicker with the idea of escaping. I felt his look directed on me from the side. "Just assume," he began again, "that I mean well with you. In any case, you needn't be afraid of me. I would very much like to try an experiment with you. It's funny, and you can learn something that's very useful. Listen, I often practice an art which is called mind reading. There's no witchcraft in it, but it seems very peculiar if one doesn't know how to do it. You can surprise people very much with it. Well, let us try it. I like you, or I interest myself in you, and I would like to find out what your real feelings are. I have already made the first step towards doing that. I have frightened you. You are then easily frightened. There are things and people of which and of whom you are afraid. Why is it? One need be afraid of no one. If you fear somebody, then it is due to the fact that he has power over you. For example, you have done nothing wrong, and the other person knows it. Then he has power over you. For example, you have done something wrong, and the other person knows it. Then he has power over you. Do you get me? It's clear, isn't it? I looked helplessly into his face, which was serious and prudent as always, and kind as well, but without any tenderness. His features were rather severe. Righteousness or something akin there lay therein. I was not conscious of what was happening. He stood like a magician before me. Have you understood? He questioned again. I nodded. I could not speak. I told you mind reading looked rather strange, but the process is quite natural. I could, for example, tell you more or less exactly what you thought about me when I once told you the story of Cain and Abel. But that has nothing to do with the matter in hand. I also think it possible that you have dreamed of me. But let's leave that out. You're a clever kid. Most of them are so stupid. I like talking now and then with a clever fellow whom I can trust. You have no objections, have you? Oh, no. Only I don't understand. Let's keep to our old experiment. We have found that the boy S is easily frightened. He is afraid of somebody. He apparently shares a secret with this other person, which causes him much disquietude. Is that about right? As in a dream, I lay under the influence of his voice, of his personality. I only nodded. Was not a voice talking there, which could only come from myself? Which knew all in a better, clearer way than I myself? Demian gave me a powerful slap on the shoulder. That's right then, I thought so. Now, just one question more. Do you know the name of the boy who has just gone away? I sank back. He had the key to my secret. This secret, which twisted back inside me as if it did not want to see the light. What sort of a fellow? There was no one there except myself. He laughed. Don't be afraid of me, said he laughingly. What's his name? I whispered. Do you mean Frank Cromer? He nodded contentedly. Bravo! You're a smart chap. We shall be good friends yet. But now I must tell you something else. This Cromer, or whatever his name is a nasty fellow. His face tells me he's a rascal. What do you think? Oh, yes, I sobbed out. He is nasty. He's a devil. But he mustn't know anything. For God's sake, he mustn't know anything. Do you know him? Does he know you? Don't worry. He's gone, and he doesn't know me. Not yet. But I should like to make his acquaintance. He goes to the public school? Yes. In which standard? In the 5th. But don't say anything to him. Please, don't say anything to him. Don't worry. Nothing will happen to you. I suppose you wouldn't like to tell me a little more about this fellow, Cromer? I can't. No, let me go. He was silent for a while. It's a pity, he said. We might have been able to carry the experiment still further. But I don't want to bother you. You know, don't you, that it is not right of you to be afraid of him? Such fear quite undermines us. You must get rid of it. You must get rid of it if you want to become a real man. Do you understand? Certainly, you are quite right. But it won't do. You don't know. You have seen that I know a lot, more than you thought. Do you owe him any money? Yes, I do, but that isn't the essential point. I can't tell. I can't. It won't help matters, then, if I give you the amount you owe him. I could very well let you have it. No, that is not the point, and please, don't say anything to anybody. Not a word. You are making me miserable. Rely on me, Sinclair. Later, you can share your secrets with me. Never, never, I exclaimed vehemently. Just as you please. I only mean, perhaps you will tell me something more later on. Only of your own free will, you understand. Surely you don't think I shall act like Cromer? Oh, no, but you don't even know anything about it. Absolutely nothing. But I think about it, and I shall never act like Cromer, believe me. Besides, you don't owe me anything." We remained a long time silent, and I became more tranquil. But Damian's knowledge became more and more of a puzzle to me. "I'm going home now," he said, and in the rain he drew his coat more closely about him. "I should only like to repeat one thing to you. Since we have gone so far in the matter, you ought to get rid of this fellow. If there is nothing else to be done, then kill him. It would impress me and please me if you were to do that. Besides, I would help you." I was again terrified. I suddenly remembered the story of Cain. I had an uncanny feeling, and I began to cry softly. So much that was weird seemed to surround me. "All right," Max Demian said, smilingly. "Go home now. We will put things square. Although murder would have been the simplest. In such matters, the simplest way is always the best. You aren't in good hands with your friend Cromer." I came home, and it seemed to me as if I had been away a year. Everything looked different. Between myself and Cromer, there now stood something like future freedom, something like hope. I was lonely no longer, and then I realized for the first time how terribly lonely I had been for weeks and weeks. And I immediately recollected what I had on several occasions turned over in my head. That a confession to my parents would afford me relief, and yet would not quite liberate me. Now, I had almost confessed to another, to a stranger, and as if a strong perfume had wafted to me, sensed the presentiment of salvation. Still, my fear was far from being overcome, and I was still prepared for long and terrible mental wrestlings with my evil genius. So it was all the more remarkable to me that everything passed off so very secretly and quietly. Cromer's whistle remained absent from our house for a day, 2 days, 3 days, a whole week. I dared not believe my senses, and lay inwardly on the watch, to see whether he would not suddenly stand before me just at that moment when I should expect him no longer. But he was, and remained, away. Distrustful of my new freedom, I still could not bring myself to believe in it wholeheartedly, until at last I met Frank Cromer. He was coming down the street, straight in my direction. When he saw me, he drew himself together, twisted his features in a brutal grimace, and turned away without more ado, in order to avoid meeting me. That was a wonderful moment for me. My enemy ran away from me. My devil was afraid of me. Surprise and joy shook me through and through. In a few days, Damian showed himself once again. He waited for me outside school. "Hello," I said. "Good morning, Sinclair. I only wanted to hear how you're getting on. Cromer leaves you in peace, doesn't he?" "Did you manage that? But how did you do it? How? I don't understand it. He hasn't come near me." "Splendid. If he should come again, I don't think he will, but he's a cheeky fellow, then simply tell him to remember Damian." "But what does it all mean? Have you had a fight with him and thrashed him?" "No, I'm not so keen on that. I simply talked to him, as I did to you, and I made it clear to him that it is to his own advantage to leave you in peace." "Oh, but you haven't given him any money?" "No, kid. You have already tried that way yourself." I attempted to pump him on the matter, but he disengaged himself. The old, embarrassed feeling concerning him came over me, an odd mixture of gratitude and shyness, of admiration and fear, of affection and inward resistance. I had the intention of seeing him again soon, and then I wanted to talk more about everything, about the Kane affair as well. But I did not see him. Gratitude is not one of the virtues in which I believe, and to require it of a child would seem to me wrong. So, I do not wonder very much at the complete ingratitude which I evinced towards Demian. Today, I believe positively that I should have been ruined for life if he had not been freed me from Cromer's clutches. At that time also, I already felt this release as the greatest event of my young life. But I left the deliverer on one side as soon as he had accomplished a miracle. As I have said, ingratitude seems to me nothing strange. Solely the lack of curiosity I evinced is odd. How was it possible that I could continue for a single day my quiet mode of life without coming nearer to the secrets with which Damien had brought me in contact? How could I restrain the desire to hear more about Kane, more about Cromer, more about thought reading? It is scarcely comprehensible, and yet it is so. I suddenly saw myself extricated from the demoniacal toils, saw again the world lying bright and cheerful before me. I was no longer subject to a paroxysm of fear. The curse was broken. I was no longer a tormented and condemned creature. I was a schoolboy again. My temperament sought to regain its equilibrium and tranquility as quickly as possible, and so I took pains above all things to put behind me all that had been ugly and menacing, and to forget it. The whole long story of my guilt, of my terrifying anxiety, slipped from my memory wonderfully quick, apparently without having left behind any scares or impressions whatsoever. The fact that I likewise tried as quickly to forget my helper and deliverer, I understand today as well. Instinctively, my mind turned from the damning recollection of my awful servitude under Cromer, and I sought to recover my former, happy, contented mental outlook, to regain that lost paradise which opened once more to me, the bright father and mother world, where my sisters dwelt in the fragrant atmosphere of purity and loving kindness such as God had extended to Abel. On the very next day after my short conversation with Damien, when I was at last fully convinced of my newly born freedom and feared no longer a relapse to my condition of slavery, I did what I had so often and so ardently desired to do. I confessed. I went to Mother and showed her the little savings box with the broken lock, filled with toy mark pieces instead of real money, and I told her how long I had been in the thrall of an evil tormentor through my own guilt. She did not understand everything, but she saw the money box, she saw my altered look, and heard my changed voice. She felt that I was healed, that I had been restored to her. And then, with lofty feelings, I celebrated my readmission into the family, the prodigal son's return home. Mother took me to Father. The story was repeated. Questions and exclamations of wonder followed in quick succession. Both parents stroked my hair and breathed deeply, as in relief from a long oppression. It was all lovely, like the stories I had read. All discords were resolved in a happy ending. I surrendered myself passionately to this harmonious state of affairs. I could not have enough of the idea that I was again free and trusted by my parents. I was a model boy at home and played more frequently than ever with my sisters. At prayers, I sang the dear old hymns with the blissful feeling of one converted and redeemed. It came straight from my heart. It was no lie this time. And yet, it was not at all as it should have been. And this is a point which alone can truly explain my forgetfulness of Demian. I ought to have made a confession to him. The confession would have been less touching and less specious, but for me, it would have been borne more fruit. It would have borne more fruit. I was now clinging fast to my former paradisiacal world. I had returned home and had been received in grace. But Demian belonged in no wise to this world. He did not fit into it. He also, in a different way from Cromer, but nevertheless he was also a seducer. He too bound me to the second evil, bad world, and of this world I never wanted to hear anything more. I could not now, and I did not wish to give up Abel and help to glorify Cain, now when I myself had again become an Abel. So much for the outward correlation of events, but inwardly it was like this. I had been freed from the hands of Cromer and the devil, but not through my own strength and effort. I had ventured a footing on the paths of the world, and they had been too slippery for me. Now that the grasp of a friendly hand had saved me, I ran back, without another glance round, to my mother's lap, to the protecting, godly, and tender security of childhood. I made myself younger, more dependent on others, more childlike than I really was. I had to replace my dependence on Cromer by a new one, since I was powerless to strike out for myself. So I chose, in the blindness of my heart, the dependence on father and mother, on the old, beloved, bright world, on this world which I knew already was not the sole one. Had I not done this, I should have had to hold to Demian, to entrust myself to him. The fact that I did not appeared to me then to be due to justifiable distrust of his strange ideas. In reality, it was due to nothing else than fear. For Demian would have required more of me than did my parents, much more. By stimulation and exhortation, by scorn and irony, he would have tried to make me more independent. Alas, I know that today, nothing in the world is so distasteful to man as to go the way which leads him to himself. And yet, about half a year later, I could not resist the temptation to ask my father while we were out for a walk. What was to be made of the fact that many people declared Cain to be better than Abel? He was much surprised and explained to me that this was a conception by no means novel. It had even emerged in the early Christian era and had been professed by sects, one of which was called the Cainites. But naturally, this foolish doctrine was nothing else than an attempt of the devil to undermine our belief. For, if one believes that Cain was right and Abel was wrong, then it follows that God has erred, and that the God of the Bible is not true and only God, but a false one. The Cainites really used to confess and preach something approximating this doctrine, but this heresy vanished from among mankind a long time ago, and he wondered the more that a school friend had been able to learn something on the subject. Nevertheless, he earnestly exhorted me not to let these ideas occupy my attention. 네, 이렇게가 2장의 끝입니다. 굉장히 많은 걸 담고 있는 장이었는데요. 그 전장에 일진이라고 부르죠. 그 전장의 일진 크로머가 나레이터를 계속 괴롭히는데 그러던 도중에 데미안이라는 학생이 이 학교에 새로 들어옵니다. 그리고 이 장의 도중에 나레이터의 이름이 처음으로 멘션이 돼요. 나레이터의 이름은 싱클레어이라고 합니다. 근데 어쨌건 이 데미안이라는 인물은 굉장히 오묘하고 미스테리한 그런 인물인 것 같습니다. 그래서 하루가 멀다 하고 이 학생에 대한 루머가 많이 돌고 또 많은 학생들이 이 데미안에 대해서 궁금해한 것 같습니다. 한 번은 데미안이 집에 돌아가는 싱클레어, 나레이터를 부르고 같이 가자고 합니다. 그리고 집으로 같이 돌아가는 길에 한 이야기를 하죠. 성경의 가인과 아벨이라는 이야기에 대한 데미안의 해석인데, 원래 성경의 이야기에 따르자면 가인은 형제인 아벨을 죽이고 돌아다니는 떠돌이 신세가 됩니다. 그리고 가인은 성경에 기록된 최초의 살인자로 나오고 악인으로 나오죠. 하지만 데미안의 생각은 다릅니다. 데미안의 해석은 가인은 사실 힘이 있는 사람이었을 뿐이고 강자가 약자를 죽인 것일 뿐이고 그 사실에 대해서 사람들은 그 강자를 두려워했기 때문에 성경에 나오는 그 이야기를 지어낸 것이다. 그런 요지의 이야기를 합니다. 싱클레어에게. 물론 꼭 그렇다라고 말한 건 아닌 것 같고요. 다만 그렇게 해석할 수도 있지 않을까 하고 넌지시 이렇게 던진 것 같습니다. 그리고 제 생각엔 이 가인과 아벨의 이 이야기는 책 전체에 더불어서 큰 심볼이 될 것 같아요. 어떤 큰 테마가 될 것 같다는 느낌이 드네요. 아니면 장 전체에 걸쳐서 여기에 대한 이야기가 굉장히 여러 번 다시 되돌아오거든요. 많이들 아벨을 의인으로 삼고 가인을 악한 악인으로 삼는 이 세상에서 가인을 오히려 강자로 보고 오히려 올바른 사람으로 보는 이 해석. 그게 바로 이 작품의 아이러니의 일부인 것 같습니다. 어쨌건 이 데미안이라는 작자는 굉장한 사람인 것 같습니다. 똑똑하다는 건 물론이고 왠지 모르게 다른 아이들과 다르게 어른과 같은 굉장히 어른스러운 모습을 많이 보여줍니다. 그리고 그 와중에 일진 크로머는 계속 싱클레어 나레이터를 괴롭히는데요. 크로마가 한 번은 나레이터에게 항상 삥을 뜯다가 이번에는 내일 너 자매 있지? 아마 누나겠죠? 니네 누나 좀 데려와봐. 이러는 거죠. 건너지 말아야 할 선을. 네. 그 크로머가 일진이 선을 넘어버렸네요. 어쨌건 그것 때문에 그 텐션이 최고조로 이어있을 때 데미안이 싱클레어를 찾아옵니다. 그리고 데미안은 싱클레어에게 어떤 문제가 있다는 걸 바로 알아채죠. 그리고 그는 이걸 thought reading이라고 불러요. 다시 말하면 독심술이죠. 네. 근데 독심술이라는 게 마술을 부리는 게 아니다라고 설명을 했어요. 데미안은. 적어도 스스로 말하기엔. 어쨌건 그래서 데미안이 또 싱클레어랑 같이 걸으면서 음 이런저런 얘기를 하면서 싱클레어의 문제, 이 갈등을 다 알게 됩니다. 싱클레어는 사실 알려주려고 한 게 아닌데 어떻게 데미안이 다 알아버려요. 그래서 데미안은 넌지시 말하기를 그런 문제가 있으면 크로머를 죽이는 게 가장 편할 텐데 말이지 라고 굉장히 캐주얼하게 말합니다. 그리고 어, 싱클레어는 그런 얘기를 듣기도 전에 크로머에 대한 얘기를 그 누구한테도 하지 말라고 겁에 질려서 그런 상태에 있는데요. 살인이라는 얘기가 나오자마자 또다시 가인과 아벨의 이야기, 거기에 다시 집 조명이 좀 갑니다. 어쨌건 싱클레어가 구걸을 하죠. 그런 얘기는 하지 말라고, 죽이지 말라고, 뭐 그런, 예. 그리고 데미안은 이제 그래, 그게 가장 쉬운 일이겠지만 네가 그렇게 결사 반대를 하니 뭐 그렇게 알아둘게 하고 작별 인사를 해요. 그 다음날 만나기로 했던 크로머 일지는 이상하게 나타나지 않습니다. 이틀이 되고 3일이 되고 일주일이 돼도 나타나지 않아요. 그래서 싱클레어는 드디어 자유다라고 느끼게 되죠. 처음엔 못 믿다가. 어느 날 크로머를 우연히 마주치게 됩니다. 그런데 이 크로머가 멀리서 싱클레어를 알아보고 이상한 미묘한 웃음을 짓더니 다시 돌아가는 거죠. 안 마주치려고. 그걸 보고 싱클레어는 이거다. 난 정말 드디어 자유다. 라고 느끼게 됩니다. 그렇고 나서 바로 데미안과의 또 대면이 있습니다. 어떻게 또 만났는지 기억이 안 나는데요. 뭐 학교가 끝나고 또 집에 돌아오면서 만났나? 그건 기억이 잘 안 나는데요. 데미안과 이야기하면서 데미안이 이제 크로머 너 안 괴롭히지? 이렇게 묻습니다. 그래서 싱클레어가 안 괴롭혀. 너 근데 어떻게 한 거야? 뭐 얘를 뭐 팼어? 때렸어? 그렇게 묻습니다. 근데 데미안은 아니 난 그렇게 하는 거 별로 안 좋아해. 너랑 얘기했듯이 크로머한테도 얘기를 했을 뿐이야. 크로머한테 단지 너를 내버려 두는 게 크로머의 신상에 더 좋을 거라는 걸 알렸을 뿐이야 라고 알려주죠. 그리고 그렇게 우리의 주인공 나레이터 싱클레어는 해방이 됩니다. 그리고 해방이 되자마자 집으로 돌아가서 이제 바로는 아니겠죠. 뭐 며칠이 지났을 수도 있는데 집으로 돌아가서 부모님한테 고백을 합니다. 지금까지 있었던 일, 지금까지 뺑 뜯기고 지금까지 괴롭힘 당하고 그랬던 모든 것을 그리고 집에서 돈도 훔친 것도 다 고백하죠. 지금까지 고백하지 못했던 거를 해방되고 나니까 모든 걸 털어놓고 다시 초반에 흑의 세계와 백의 세계 이 이분법적인 진영을 다시 돌아옵니다. 흑의 세계에서 다시 백의 세계로. 그래서 그렇게 2장이 끝난 것 같습니다. 물론 이 두 번째 장이 끝나기 직전에 하지만 이라는 그 문구가 달죠. 그래서 마치 돌아온 탕자 마냥 나쁜 짓을 저지르고 다시 회개하고 돌아왔는데 마음 한편으로는 이제 이미 흙의 맛을 봐버렸다고 할까요? 왠지 그렇게 될 것 같아요. 네. 흑과 백의, 음, 이분법적인 나눔, 가인과 아벨, 강자와 약자, 옳음과 옳고 그름, 그리고 악인과 선인, 여기에 대한 경계선, 이걸 굉장히 생각을 많이 하게 하는 방식으로 다루는 것 같습니다. 현재까지는. 그래서 앞으로 어떻게 될지는 모르겠어요. 그리고 뭐 계속 읽으면서 알아나가겠지만요. 지금까지 읽은 바로는 굉장히 매력적인 작품인 것 같습니다. 그리고 읽으면서 저도 사실 저의 어린 시절이 많이 떠오르고 저 또한 공감할 수 있는 내용이 굉장히 많은 것 같아요. 오히려 나이가 어리기 때문에 일진들의 괴롭힘에 더욱 아파하는 그런 모습이 있죠. 저 또한 나레이터 싱클레어처럼 저 스스로를 보호하지 못하는 그런 성격이었어요. 네, 항상 쫄보였고요. 뭐 반의 일진이 저를 타겟팅하기 굉장히 좋은 대상이었죠. 저는 항상 착한 아이로 알려져 있었고 어 네. 저 또한 싱클레어가 말하는 흑과 백의 세계에 굉장히 이분법적으로 어릴 땐 접근했던 것 같습니다. 그리고 한 일진의 괴롭힘을 당하면서 어 그런 제 세상이 깨지기 시작했던 것 같아요. 그래서 인제 책에서 이야기하는 게 굉장히 스스로에게 이렇게 와닿는 것 같습니다. 앞으로 어떻게 이 내용을, 이 주제를 작가가 풀어나갈지 참 궁금하네요. 아무래도 이 책은요, 다음 영어 낭독 시간에도 한번 계속 이어가야 될 것 같아요. 이 책을 끝낼 때까지. 그래서 이 책은 데미안은 영어 버전은 적어도 화요일에 다시 낭독을 또 이어서 하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 배혜님. 우와, 라이브 떠서 오랜만에 들어와 보네요. 노인과 바다 자주 들었는데 반갑네요. 네, 잘 오셨습니다. 오랜만에 들어오셔서 감사합니다. 네, 세진님. 크로모 담당 일진 데미안. 세진님 또 가족들 건드리다니. 네, 선을 넘었죠. 소울님, 얼마 전에 읽었는데 영어로 듣게 되니 좋은데 어렵네요. 그래도 열심히 귀 열고 들었습니다. 네, 잘하셨어요. 잘 오셨습니다. 감사합니다. 배혜님, 사페 데미안. 읽다 보면은 사이코패스 진짜 맞죠? 뭔가 소름 끼치고 되게, 네. 앞으로 어떻게 캐릭터가 전개될지 궁금합니다. 또 배혜님, 영알못이라 목소리만 듣는 중이었는데 요약해 주셔서 더 좋네요. 잘 들었어요. 고생 많으셨습니다. 아, 네, 감사합니다. 저도 요약하는 게 저 스스로한테도 이제 이 내용을 기억하고 계속 이렇게 읽어가는 게 좋은 것 같아요. 네, 소울님, 기대할게요. 네, 감사합니다. 저도 기대가 되네요. 세시님, 너무 재밌네요. 너무 궁금해서 다음 장을 찾아서 읽어봐야겠어요. 저도 어린 시절이 떠올라서 싱클레어를 응원하게 되고 데미안 같은 조력자의 도움, 당시엔 선생님을 받았던 기억이 나네요. 흐흐. 네, 그렇죠. 어린 시절에 기억을 돌이켜 봤을 때 항상 푸르르다고 하기가 쉽지만 그때 당시에는 어리면 어릴수록 뭔가가 피 튀기고 잔인한 그 세계가 있죠. 저도 왠지 모르게 그때 갈등이 떠오르는 것 같습니다. 그리고 어린 시절에 느꼈던 그런 갈등은 어른이 돼서 느끼는 것보다 차원이 다른 것 같아요. 정말 그 누구도 나를 도와줄 수 없을 것 같고, 막 그 누구가 온다 해도 그냥 너무나 절망스럽고, 누구한테도 말하면 안 될 것 같고, 그런, 네. 그게 참 어린 시절이란 게 양날의 칼인 것 같습니다. 소금해님, 지금은 웃어넘길 수 있는 일인데, 그땐 세상이 무너지는 것 같죠. 그쵸, 맞아요. 그때는 정말, 아유, 지금은 웃기죠. 지금은 애기들이 뭘. 그때 저는 아마 제 기억으로는 초등학교 3학년인가? 그랬을 거예요. 근데 걔가 저를 꽤 오래 괴롭혔어요. 한 1, 2년 동안. 뭐 어릴 때는 굉장히 긴 시간이니까. 근데 그렇다고 막 그렇게 괴롭힌 것도 아닌데 되게 제가 멘탈이 약해서 그냥 괴로웠었어요. 걔가 막 저를 어, 제 기억으로는 때리고 그런 기억은 아닌데, 제가 느끼기에는 때린 것보다 훨씬 뭔가가 고통스러웠어요. 그게. 근데 그러면서 큰다고 말하기에는 좀 잔인하고 그건 아닌 것 같은데, 그래도, 그때를 생각하며, 어린 시절을 생각하며, 저는 저에 대한 어떤 인사이트를 많이 배우게 되는 것 같습니다. 네. 어쨌건, 지나니까 걸음이 되고, 그것도 이제 웃어 넘길 수 있죠. 네, 이 책이 아무래도 장 하나하나가 길다 보니까 오늘, 최고로 늦게까지 낭독을 하게 됐네요. 어떻게, 아직까지 잠 안 드시는 분들, 내일 아침 일찍 하시는 거 없겠죠? 네, 저는 이제 곧 하루를 시작할 것 같습니다. 네, 가서 아침도 먹고 오늘 차도 정비 맡겨야 되는 게 있어가지고요. 네, 세진님 너무너무 고생하셨습니다. 남겨주셨어요. 감사합니다. 세진님도 그리고 함께 하시는 모든 분들도 안 주무시고 같이 귀 쫑긋 하시느라고 고생하셨습니다. 하루의 마무리를 지을 때 항상 함께 한다는 게 저한테는 참 큰 힘이 되는 것 같습니다. 네, 저는 하루를 시작할 때 여러분이랑 함께 하는 거지만요. 네, 배혜님 화이팅, 소울님 고생하셨어요. 황주부 별주부 아니고님 감사합니다. 네, 여러분들 너무너무 감사합니다. 함께해서 행복했고요. 또 내일 밤 12시에 뵙도록 하겠습니다. 내일은 한국어로 낭독을 진행하겠습니다. 궁금하신 분들은 데미안 영어로 진행하는 건요. 다음 주 화요일에 또 뵙도록 하고요. 네, 여러분들 모두 내일도 활기찬 하루, 좋은 하루, 건강하시고 따뜻한 하루 보내시길 바랍니다. 밖은 차갑지만 마음 한켠은 따뜻하길. 네, 그리고 좋은 잠 주무시고 좋은 밤 되시길 바랄게요. 네, 여러분 다시 한번 감사합니다. 저는 이만 인사드리고 가보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 소금해님도 감사합니다. 화이팅 하세요. 배님도 감사합니다. 그럼 이만 안녕히 계세요. 좋은 밤 되세요.